Welcome to this special event on the Balkans 2022. My name is Edward Joseph of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, the Foreign Policy Institute, which is sponsoring this event in partnership with the Wilson Center, European Council on Foreign Relations, ECFR, Transatlantic Leadership Network, and Balkan Insider. We welcome all of you. And for our guests in Serbia, let me give my congratulations on Serbian Statehood Day today. And let me also thank our FPI Director, Cinnamon Dornsife, for her support and encouragement on this event. So at this special event today, we're going to focus on two contrasting questions regarding the Balkans in 2022. The first is, how bad can it get? What are the plausible scenarios? Now that's a negative question, but we're going to try in these 2 hours to then turn to a positive question, which is a breakthrough possible? Is there a way to get out of this serial crisis management? And that's when we telescope out to a strategic look at the Balkans, and we're going to examine the recent SAIS Wilson Center report, From Crisis to Convergence, how to tackle instability in the Balkans at its source. And we have an outstanding group of experts here today to discuss that question. And we have two groups of experts. We have both our co-authors of this report, and we have prominent expert discussants from around the region. So let me introduce them to you. And then later, they will have an opportunity, each one, 10 minutes to give their remarks. And at the end, we'll have discussion after I first introduce the topic and present our strategy to you. But first, let's go to the group of co-authors of the report. And let me first turn, and if each one could turn on his or her camera, as I mentioned your name, please, to introduce you. So, and I'll mention the country where they're from. So we have from Romania, we have Dr. Iulia Joja. And Iulia, we're very pleased to have you with us.
Great to be here, thank you.
Great, Iulia. Then second, we have from Slovakia, and in Bratislava, we have Jan Singel. Jan, welcome.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Of course, and I should have mentioned that Iulia is with Georgetown University here in Washington, and Jan is the CEO of Strategic Analysis there in Slovakia. And then next, we have from Kosovo, Dr. and former Ambassador Lulzim Petsi, Executive Director of the Kosovo Institute for Policy Research and Development, or KIPRED. And Luli, welcome. Welcome to you as well.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Great, Luli, great to have you with us. Now, our co-author, Dr. Branislav Radeljic of Serbia, who's a professor at two universities, cannot join us due to a family emergency. Brani, we wish you the best. And we've just learned, similarly, that our discussant, Dr. Albert Rakipi, may not be able to join us. Each of them has had to fly, and each of them has to fly, unfortunately, for family emergencies. And Albert, we also wish you the best. He possibly may be able to join us. But our second group is our esteemed discussants, experts from around the region. And we have from Serbia, we have Igor Bandovic, who is the director of the Belgrade Center for Security Policy. Welcome, Igor.
Hi, Ed. Good to be here.
Nice to have you with us, Igor. And from Kosovo, based in Berlin, we have Angelusha Marina, who is Senior Policy Fellow at ECFR. Welcome, Angelusha.
Thank you, Ed. Good to be here.
Okay, and I see also having joined us, wonderful, from Sarajevo, the one and only Srećko Latal, researcher with Balkans Crossroads and a much-read contributor to Balkan Insight. And Srećko, dobrodošli, welcome.
Hi, Edward. Glad to be here.
Great to have you with us, Srećko. And as I mentioned, that's it. We have, again, two of our guests, unfortunately, who will not be able to join us. So, having introduced the speakers, let me introduce the subject of our discussion today. So we have these two questions. how bad can it get in the Balkans, and is a breakthrough possible? And of course, we do this and hold this event with the specter of a Russian invasion of Ukraine hanging over all of Europe. And actually, Ukraine is the ideal place to start today's discussion, because in most respects, Ukraine is the opposite of the Balkans. So we have the obvious problem in Ukraine. It's Russia that holds the absolute advantage with its contiguity to Ukraine and its borders. And in the Balkans, though, it's exactly the opposite. It's the US, EU, and NATO that hold the strategic advantage. It's the EU that has the absolute strategic advantage over China as a trading partner. Just look at any pie chart and you can see that. And it's the countries of the region themselves, despite the disingenuous stance of the EU on enlargement, that enjoy advantages unique to any trouble spot on the globe. So right away, there's the mystery. So many years, 3 decades after the dissolution of Yugoslavia began, 27 years after the Dayton Agreement and the Erdut Agreement in Croatia, 21 years after the Ohrid Agreement, 9 years after Croatia entered the EU. Why are responsible international officials like the High Representative in Bosnia warning of war in Bosnia? Why is there deadlock and confrontation in Kosovo and unprecedented ethno-national tensions in Montenegro? And meanwhile, the citizens, particularly, for example, in Bosnia, continue to leave, having despaired of the condition. So clearly the glass in the region was not half full, and the talk about muddling through in the region was wrong. So it's our belief, and this is what we're going to try to do today and discuss, is it's time for some hard thinking about the region. Why, with all these advantages, do the Balkans defy resolution? And indeed, why are they moving backwards? Why is this region moving backwards? And that's the challenge that my co-authors, Brani and Luli from Serbia and Kosovo, respectively, and Julia Jan and Paul Villaseria, who's from Spain, took on. And the result is our report, From Crisis to Convergence, a strategy to tackle instability in the Balkans at its source. And now I'm going to try to quickly share a screen with you. And there we go. So I just wanted to share the our cover of our report for you. There you go. So you can see we used on the cover deliberately a map, basically Southern Europe, which includes the Balkans. And here we're talking about instability in the Balkans at its source, and yet we have not only the Balkans, but we have the 5 European non-recognizing countries, 4 of which are members of NATO, in red there, along marked as well with Serbia, which you see in yellow, and Kosovo, which is in green. So what's the connection here? Why do we make this connection between these non-recognizers and this mystery that we face about why the Balkans so many years are still in turmoil? Well, we give the answer in the report. And the answer that we give in the report is that, in fact, the region is not this morass of intractable ethno-national tensions that the Balkans are synonymous for. Instead, we believe those ethno-national tensions, which stand in the way of the fight against corruption and the fight for rule of law and democracy, are a function of 2 factors. And those are strategic orientation and national power. And that's the crux of the problem. Because the largest Western Balkan 6 state, Serbia, has polities in 4 neighboring states and ethno-national aspirations in 3 of them: Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Montenegro. Now let me stop the share here, if I can, and come back to the main screen. And it is this autocratic government in Belgrade, a government that is precisely oriented towards illiberal powers, Russia and China. And having been in power for a decade, the Vučić regime has methodically rolled back Serbia's democracy. And Serbia is protected within the EU by the leading European illiberal power, Hungary. And we believe these alignments are not tactical, just to get vaccines or investment, but they're actually reflective of the regime character in Belgrade. Now, let me hasten to add here that it's not that the other countries in the region don't harbor ethno-national agendas, let's say for Greater Albania or separation of Herzegovina. It's that those agendas are constrained by their Western orientation. For example, Croatia and Albania are members of NATO, which vastly complicate any change of their borders. But Serbia doesn't have this constraint. To the contrary, it carries out a false balance between East and West under the banner of, quote, Euro-realism. But that only addresses Serbia's strategic orientation. Remember, we said that there are two factors. So where's the national power? Where does the Vučić regime get the power to subvert its neighbors and to confound US and EU diplomats? So this is the other puzzle, the other real mystery that people should be asking about. Why do capable international officials assail corruption in neighboring countries, but hardly mention it in official corruption in Belgrade? Why does the most prominent US official in Serbia repeatedly laud a regime that openly on billboards promotes Beijing and Xi Jinping and backs Moscow over Ukraine and Crimea? Why does this US official repeatedly call Serbia the political and economic leader in the region? Why was Serbia invited to the Summit for Democracy after it was told it would not be? And why did the EU in December give Serbia a pass on rule of law standards? And it's an accession and opening new chapters. In short, why does the EU and US participate in this charade with the Vučić regime? So we have an answer, and we believe the answer is clear. Serbia has leverage over Kosovo, and through it, over the US and EU. And the source of that leverage, the reason for that cover that you just saw on the map with the red of those non-recognizing countries, is the non-recognizers, and in particular, just the 4 NATO non-recognizers. Now, let me pause here and say this is where people, even officials, get confused. What is this Serbian leverage over Kosovo, and why is it so significant? So let me explain here, and let me slow down and just pause and explain this. The best way to understand Serbian leverage is by comparison with a much more clear case, and that's Bulgaria and North Macedonia. And we all know, as an EU member, that Bulgaria can unilaterally block the opening of North Macedonia's EU accession negotiations, and then press its demands for history and language with Skopje. So it's very clear in that case how leverage works. We all know that. And similarly, Belgrade can unilaterally block Prishtina's pathway to NATO and the EU, even though it's not a member of either organization. So how is this possible? It's very simple. The European non-recognizers have effectively handed their proxy to Belgrade by their position, by saying, we won't recognize Kosovo until Serbia does, which is effectively the position. So that means Kosovo can't advance until Belgrade, with its proxy, says so. That leaves a status quo of no settlement between Pristina and Belgrade that penalizes and punishes one party, Pristina, but benefits the other, Belgrade. And as I said, this among the benefits, it insulates Belgrade from scrutiny. And the pass, for example, on rule of law is just one example. Now, what's important to note here is it's not just us, the co-authors of this report, who cite the centrality of Kosovo. It's Belgrade itself, in its words and its actions. We have senior Serbian officials. Recently, the Serbian Foreign Minister, Nikola Selakovic, stated that Kosovo, which is safeguarded by a NATO peacekeeping force, is, I quote, the main political and security challenge for Serbia. And that's the words. What about the actions? The obsessive non-recognition campaign that we saw just yesterday. Foreign Minister Selakovic met the leaders of Sao Tome. Last week, the Equatorial Guinea, running to Greece, running to Spain, all to shore up, even to Iran, to shore up non-recognition of Kosovo, to shore up Kosovo's isolation and its weakness, which is Serbian strategy. And that obsession and that focus, that non-recognition campaign is actually the indicator. That's the opening for the West here. Our strategy, Western strategy, should be on eroding Serbian leverage. And we recommend doing that through the 4 NATO non-recognizers that you saw on the screen. Now, we're realistic. We know that recognition by those 4, Spain, Slovakia, Romania, and Greece, is not immediate, except perhaps in Greece, which could come sooner. But this is why we recommend convergence of the positions of these 4, convergence with the majority position in NATO on Kosovo. And we believe this is feasible. By working within NATO, you reduce from 5 non-recognizers, you reduce it to 4. You leave the least promising non-recognizer, Cyprus, out. You bring the most supportive European country, the United Kingdom, in, and you allow the continued close partnership, particularly by the US and Greece, within the alliance. And it's very important to note here that Greece, for its own strategic reasons, has an interest in recognizing Kosovo. And we also believe that this would have a feasible and a swift impact on Serbia, because Kosovo's pathway to NATO membership, even through Partnership for Peace, erodes Serbian leverage, and a pathway to membership would actually eliminate it. Now, let me emphasize here what our policy of convergence is not. Let me quickly list 4 things that it is not. Number 1, it is not coercion of Serbia. There's no part of our recommendation that says Serbia has to be pressured to recognize Kosovo. Those positions in the United States and the EU on that subject already exist. President Biden just wrote President Vučić again today on Serbian Statehood Day, again calling for mutual recognition. So those positions are known, and convergence adds nothing, no change to that. And that's very important because it does not hand Alexander Vučić a card to play the great defender of Serb interests. And it does not inject Kosovo into the domestic politics any more than it already is within Serbia. Convergence is mostly behind the scenes. It's about the US, led by the Biden administration, working with its partners behind the scenes mostly, and not visible to the public except in the ultimate results as these 4 key countries adjust and modify their policies towards Kosovo. Second, convergence is not humiliation. In our view, the definition of what Serbia itself believes is a dignified settlement of the difficult Kosovo case, will evolve once the leverage is more equalized within the dialogue. And in our vision, the goal is not some humiliating settlement. What it is we envision a dignified, stabilizing solution with full protections for the Kosovo Serb community within a unitary, functional, sovereign Republic of Kosovo within its existing borders. So that's our vision. And third, convergence is not about Greater Albania. To the opposite, we recommend the US should threaten sanctions on any leader in Kosovo or in Albania who promotes union of Kosovo and Albania. And besides that, this type of a solution stands in the way of a partition of Kosovo that would lead inevitably to just that kind of a union and a Greater Albania, the destabilization of Kosovo's neighbors. And finally, convergence is not either or. The fight against corruption, the other general policies that the US and EU have can continue, and they can be extended more effectively to Serbia instead of letting Serbia be held to lower standards than everyone else in the region. Now, won't all this approach, this convergence approach, won't this just make Serbia more angry and resentful? Like, for example, people say NATO expansion for Russia did, maybe even push Belgrade into arms, further into the arms of Moscow, even maybe backing Moscow on Ukraine? We don't believe so. This is about power dynamics. And the power dynamics in the Balkans are very different from Ukraine. The Balkans are far from Russia in distance and in core interest. And Serbia is not Russia. The best comparison is to Belarus, and becoming the Belarus of the Balkans is not a very good option for any government in Serbia. And let me finally close here and say, bring back the analogy of Bulgaria. Imagine that Bulgaria's leverage were taken away. Imagine the EU moved to consensus -1, as OSCE does for opening of negotiations, and it no longer had leverage over North Macedonia. Would it double down on its posture towards North Macedonia and insist even more of its demands about history and language? Or would it recognize reality? We believe the latter. And we believe the same could happen swiftly in Serbia. And in fact, we know there's precedent for this because in Serbia's recent history, even the Serbian parliament, for example, went far to recognize tacitly the genocide in Srebrenica. And we've seen other examples, including in Bosnia-Herzegovina, of major steps towards reconciliation between Serbs and Bosniaks and Croats as well. And we believe that this convergence would have a positive impact on Bosnia-Herzegovina, not solving all the dilemmas, but creating the precondition for their settlement, for the negotiations that would have to take place. And the same is true with Montenegro. It would create the precondition for Montenegrins and Serbs to negotiate their formula about living together in a Western-oriented state. So that's our view. If we could sum it up in one phrase, it would be this: it's better to act from strength than to act from weakness. And right now, we are acting from weakness in the Balkans. And that's our view of why we're having to discuss this day, even how bad it can get in the Balkans. So with that, I now turn first to our co-authors, and then we will move to our discussants and hear what they have to say about our strategy and also about just how bad it can get in the Balkans. And first, among our co-authors, and also I'm sure quite preoccupied with the situation between Russia and Ukraine, I bring in Dr. Yulia Zhozha. Yulia, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you for this overview, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this report. Congratulations on the report. I think it's going to, I hope it's going to make a difference in terms of Western policy vis-a-vis the Balkans, as we're seeing this region increasingly difficult, not that it hadn't been before, but we're also looking at the options that we have from the Western side in terms of stabilizing and making progress in the region. My job here, and I'll try to keep my remarks as short as possible because I know we have a fantastic lineup of experts discussing the report and the findings from the report, but my job is to try to offer a lay of the land, if you will, in terms of Romania and how I see Romania as a non-recognizer in the regional context with the difficulties that it has vis-a-vis different neighbors in this context. Every time I'm asked or I have to talk or do work on Romania's Balkans policy, I go back and check if anything had changed since the last time I checked. And every time I go back and I find that invariably, usually, most of the times, not much has changed. Romania is one of the non-recognizers, and I think Ed did a fantastic job in differentiating between different non-recognizers and how different their motivations and positions are vis-a-vis the Kosovo issue and the larger Balkan issue. Um, in this context, Romania, in this context, and generally in the Western context, Romania in Europe is one of the more pro-Western countries, one of the more pro-Americans among the non-recognizers as well. And this can make a difference in terms of the Western leverage vis-a-vis convergence and Romania's position on Kosovo overall. Romania's refusal to recognize is very much tied to its national security and perspectives on these things. The biggest threat Romania perceives in terms of security is Russian aggression. Let's not forget that right now Romania has the longest EU border with Ukraine and a significant Romanian minority in Ukraine, that Moldova belonged to Romania before World War II, and that dictates how many resources of foreign policy and beyond Romania dedicates to Moldova first, Ukraine second, and the Black Sea region overall, which keeps Romania and me very busy right now with everything going on in that part of the world. The second largest threat to national security from a Romanian perspective remains, though it's not as visible as that, Hungary, especially under Orban. Despite Romanian minority rights being extensive for EU standards vis-a-vis the Hungarian minority in Romania, Hungarian revisionism vis-a-vis parts of Romania and its minority are perceived as a constant challenge by a large part of Romanian public opinion as well as decision makers. Just last year, I believe, Hungary's president compared in Ukraine the illegal annexation of Crimea to the Trianon, which had consequences and reverberations across the region and was badly heard in Romania. Orban's ties to Putin do not help. On the contrary, Romanian fears of military alliances or a military alliance between Hungary and Russia against Romanian territory are very vivid, even if they're not expressed as such in political narratives. Russia's support of separatist movements across Europe, from Scotland to Spain, are an extra reason to worry for Bucharest. In the current security and political context, such as Orban's visit to Moscow the other day, a lot will be needed by Romania from the EU and the US to convince Bucharest that it is protected against Russia and possibly against the Orban regime vis-a-vis minorities. And this is sort of my central thesis, if you will. I don't see the Romanian position on Kosovo as unchangeable or stubborn. I see it informed by Romanian security perceptions. Every now and then, Kosovo emerges as a topic among Romanian politicians, but really only marginally every 5 years or so. It's not a priority for Romania, and neither are the Balkans. And we can discuss how critical that is and how problematic, but this is the reality on the ground. Until conflict would erupt over there and would affect Romanian security directly, like Ukraine does today, Romania will not be able or will not focus on the Balkans because it has finite resources focused elsewhere. But the Romanian position, I believe, can be changed here and there on bits and pieces if the EU and the United States manage to offer Romania something in exchange, preferably indirect security guarantees, more status, more recognition as a positive game changer in the region. If Orban policies vis-a-vis the minorities and the rhetoric vis-a-vis the minorities would change, if the EU would talk about Romania as safeguarding minority rights and of Orban's policy as threatening to regional security, if the Russian-Hungarian alliance would cease to exist politically and Hungary would act as a reliable NATO member, then Romania would have more reasons on the ground to change its position. Now, when it comes to Serbia, the Vucic issue is an issue for Romania, but again, not a major one given the regional situation. Romania has historical ties to Serbia, but the Romanian government does not support the Vučić government. And yes, Bucharest sees what Vučić does to the EU, what Vučić does with China and with Russia, and in how it aligns itself vis-a-vis or against the West. But then Hungary does worse within the West, being part of NATO and the EU. And if you think about it, most of Romania's neighbors are at least leaning towards Russia in the current context. Both Hungary and Bulgaria recently refused NATO aid. Moldova is partially occupied by Russia and fears it is next after Ukraine. So yes, there is a capacity for convergence in Bucharest, and I would say it's important and should not be ignored, and we try to highlight that within the report. Romania does support EU enlargement overall, so that's a plus vis-a-vis convergence. But what we have to keep in mind in the context of Romania is that a lot is needed in terms of security perceptions, given the current context, to make Bucharest feel like it is in its benefit and its national security interest to change its position and further increase convergence on Kosovo. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was great. So clear. And you highlighted a number of key points, but of course, let me just emphasize that the points you raised about supporting Bucharest on its concerns over Russia and over Hungary, and providing more by way of security guarantees and acknowledging its positive record on the Hungarian minority. I just want to emphasize this. These are things that we should be doing anyway. The US and the EU should be doing anyway, even if it weren't beneficial in the context of Kosovo. It's so again, the point is that convergence is consistent with wider perspectives. And as we don't have, Julia, we don't have our colleague Paul Villas Syria from Spain with us. You mentioned the Russian strategy of fragmentation within Europe. And we saw, of course, the revelations of the Kremlin conspiring and supporting separatists in Catalonia. And so because we don't have Paul here from Spain, let me just say the great irony. So it is Russia, which is, of course, Serbia's strategic partner, and that's a quote. It's a strategic partner, and Putin just gave Vučić very warm congratulations and noted many facets that they have in common. And Serbia just in December backed Russia over Ukraine and Crimea. So the irony is that Spain is worried about Catalonia, but it is this alliance of that Russia and its proxies and its like Hungary and its allies that are promoting division, including within Spain. So now, Julia, we're going to turn to and give the floor to our co-author from Slovakia, Jan Singal, who obviously, Jan, you can share your perspectives on these questions. Please, Jan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Edward. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. It is great being here in this amazing lineup of speakers and Balkan experts. I will continue where my fellow speaker left it, because there are many similarities between Slovakia and Romania in terms of Kosovo. But before I get there, I will touch those two questions which you posed at the beginning. So first, how bad is the situation in the Balkans? And maybe why it is, I will just with a couple of words share my views on why it is this serious, and then what the key actors could do to help us out from this immediate crisis. So based on the strategy that we drafted. So first and foremost, the EU seems to be kind of absent from the Balkans after the pandemics. During the pandemics, EU kind of closed itself in it, and is just slowly returning to the region, and it has its impact. enlargement, which was kind of a biggest driver or more significant driver for reforms and for changes for our countries that joined the European Union in the last batch, but also for countries from the Western Balkans. The enlargement seems to be now either stalled at all, or in a kind of in a kind of a pause mode due to the short-sighted populistic and domestic moves in some of the EU member countries, such as Bulgaria, which are hazarding with the EU's credibility in the region, and this thus kind of contributing to this destabilization. Plus, of course, this is opening a door for actors, for outside actors such as Russia and China in the region. And the most tragic thing maybe is when even Western Balkan countries deliver what they promised to deliver, and then it is the decision on the EU side is either hampered or it is even stalled. Such as the case of the Kosovo visa liberalization, or opening accession talks with Albania or North Macedonia, where the EU clearly stated that Kosovo delivered what they were promised to deliver, and also that Albania and North Macedonia delivered what they were promised, what they were supposed to deliver. And this is of course endangering the credibility of the EU in the region. So then there is no surprise that some countries have already set to join some kind of a parallel projects, such as the Open Balkan, whose goals are dubious at best. Other countries of the regions are coping hard with the instability and with the internal strife. So what the key actors such as the EU and the US can do to improve this kind of a crisis, as Ed laid it down in the introduction, this strategy that we suggested. There are some thoughts on how we could proceed. First of all, the convergence strategy does not mean to coerce Serbia to recognize Kosovo, but rather it is about leveling the play field, which is at the moment uneven. The protracted status quo is in current Serbia's administration interest. So therefore, we need to change the perspectives of 5 Kosovo non-recognizers, especially with the focus on the 4 that are members of the NATO, where it makes the most sense, so the Slovakia, Romania, Greece, and Spain. Again, here we are not talking about the immediate recognition, but about a convergence of their views with the majority of the members of the NATO alliance. Because we believe that only closer cooperation of NATO and Kosovo could help to level the play field and provide security guarantees to maintain security and stability in this volatile region. So one of the steps on this convergence can be in offering Kosovo partnership for peace status. It's something that Serbia, for example, has enjoyed for many years, despite the fact that they are openly declaring themselves as militarily neutral, but still they are in the Partnership for Peace, NATO's Partnership for Peace program. So offering partnership for peace to Kosovo does not necessarily have to mean recognition, because the documents can be scrapped from the status-related connotation, similarly as it is in case of stabilization and association agreement between Kosovo and the European Union. And the most important is that the external actors such as Russia and China does not have leverage over such move, because the whole partnership of peace is of course in the hands of the NATO 30. It naturally does not require a UN Security Council recognition, where would China or Russia could impose their veto. Of course, this is purely in the hands of NATO 30 countries. What else can be done within this kind of a set of activities? So for example, our country, Slovakia, could return to KFOR, the Kosovo force in Kosovo, which is a NATO force in Kosovo, which is helping with stabilizing the situation there since the end of conflict in 1999. Slovakia withdrew from KFOR by the end of the year 2010, so sometime after the Kosovo's independence declaration. And Slovakia was then citing the fact that the operation was training the Kosovo security forces, and that it perceived that as a potential recognition of Kosovo statehood if the operation is preparing a country's army or Kosovo's army. So that was the main logic behind the withdrawal. The second very convenient reason was that it was the year when Slovakia was recovering from the economic crisis, and there was also a decrease in the defense budget, so there were cuts. So at the time, it looked like a convenient move to withdraw from KFOR. However, fast forward now, 12 years later, we can see that the KFOR is enjoying support and trust not only from Kosovo's majority population, but also from the Serbian minority population. And even the Republic of Serbia is recognizing KFOR as a stabilization force in Kosovo, cooperates with it, does joint patrolling and of the border, and calls upon KFOR whenever there is an escalation. So even Serbia is in support of KFOR. So that would give a kind of an argument to those in Slovakia that might be opposing the Kosovo's independence. Furthermore, there are two more non-recognizers, namely Greece and Romania, that never left never left KFOR, never withdrew their troops from the KFOR mission in Kosovo, and they are still contributing. So this could be kind of a logical argument also to those that do not recognize Kosovo's independence. The return of why return of Slovakia to Kosovo could be a kind of a small step but important step. Well, first, on one hand, it would strengthen the operation itself. And on the other hand, it would send a clear signal to the Belgrade that something is changing with the policy in Bratislava, because of the reasons why Slovakia withdrew its participation in KFOR in 2010. So the return would be a signal, clear signal that there is something of a change. So this gesture could be explained to Belgrade as increasing Slovakia's contribution in stabilizing the Western Balkans, with the aim of protecting the non-majority communities in Kosovo. But it also should be signaled to Belgrade that there is a change of the approach in Bratislava, and Slovakia is not willing to offer carte blanche to the current Serbia's government. Now, getting to what Julia was talking about the domestic connotations, because domestic reasons certainly played the key role in Slovakia's position on the issue of Kosovo's non-recognition. It's a very similar case to Romania. The reasons are concerns of the Orban's policies in the region and the long-term cohabitation of Slovaks and Hungarians, though here I have to point out that the people-to-people relations between Slovaks and Hungarians and the Hungarian minority in Slovakia are very good. The only problem jumps in only when politicians mix in. So when nationalist or populistic political leaders on either side of the border of the Danube River mix in, and then they increase the tension. But there were some raised eyebrows also in Slovakia last year when it was revealed that Hungary was buying arable land and some historical buildings in Slovakia, and Slovakia asked for Hungary for explanation. Unlike Romania, Slovakia is probably the second most pro-Russian country from the non-five recognizers, maybe after the Cyprus. There are strong sentiments in Slovakia that are pro-Russian. It's really difficult to explain because Slovakia was occupied by Soviet troops since 1968, when it was still Czechoslovakia, after so-called Czech Prague, or after so-called toll in 1968, when troops of Warsaw Group occupied Czechoslovakia for next over 20 years, but still there are some sentiments among the population with affinities toward Russia. On the other hand, Slovakia is supporting the EU and NATO enlargement. The Western Balkan is one of the main priorities, one of the main foreign policy priorities for already over the 2 decades. So Slovakia pays a close take a close look at the development in the region. So maybe I will stop here, and I might elaborate further during the next round or during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. That was great. And let me, before handing the floor to Luli, Jan, just to emphasize the 2 interesting points that you raised. One about sending Slovak troops back to KFOR to rejoin the Greek and Romanian troops that never even left KFOR. And we should mention Spain could also do this. And that this is not recognition, but yet, Jan, as you pointed out very clearly, would send a strong signal to Belgrade. And I just wanted to add what it wouldn't send to Belgrade and to Vučić is any ability to exploit this. Because first, KFOR is very popular with Kosovo Serbs. Belgrade depends on KFOR. And the third is that Serbia itself, officials themselves, to try to highlight what they perceive as the problems in Kosovo, call for the reinforcement of KFOR. So any Slovak official or Spanish official can say, well, hey, you asked for reinforcement, and so we're going back. And yet that message would be sent, and would also be sent, I believe, instantly to the Russian ambassador in Belgrade, who, of course, visited the border in September, trying to stoke tensions there. And then second, and this is a segue to Luli, is you pointed out how the NATO pathway for Kosovo, Russia and China can do nothing about. And this is what's very significant about the change in Serbia's strategic calculus from convergence, is that protection at the UN Security Council, that all-important veto, becomes negligible in importance because, yes, NATO membership is much more relevant and important to Kosovo than is UN membership. And UN membership is not a requirement to join the alliance. And perhaps, Luli, you might, in addition to your other comments, address those points. And so let me give the floor to Dr. Hetzi. Luli, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Ed, and for this great opportunity to talk to such a distinguished audience. Well, I will start with the issue of NATO. Well, as we know, there are 2 precedents in the past regarding the NATO membership without having UN membership as such. So we shall recall the case of Portugal and Italy, in 2 countries that were actually founding members of NATO in 1949, but there is also in the case of West Germany in 1955 that joined NATO without having a UN membership. And in essence, this has shaped the precedent which is valid in today, because North Atlantic Treaty doesn't emphasize in any article that any European country should have a UN membership in order to join NATO, and the precedent exists in this case. So what I can say further about this issue, NATO membership is the first national security interest of Kosovo, because it is about the security of the country. And why it's so? Can we imagine today the situation in the Balkans when we are facing Russian aggression in Ukraine without having Croatia, Albania, Montenegro, and Macedonia as NATO members? Let's try to imagine that kind of situation. I think that it could have been terrible, and that the possibilities for starting a new armed conflict due to Russian influence would have been much higher than today. Nowadays, there is a kind of intention in the region to view EU and US as outsiders altogether with China and Russia. I have to say here that US and EU are insiders in the Balkans, whereas China and Russia do have influence not because of their strength in the region, but because certain countries made the choice to open the door to their influence. So it was the will of certain countries of the region to open the door to Russian and Chinese influence. And here, nowadays, there is a clear choice that countries of the region have to make. And it is, the first and foremost, it is the matter of reliability of allies in the region, meaning NATO countries in the Western Balkans. And the second one is about alignments. Do we want to go and to stick towards the Western orientation, or do we want to align with Russia? If the conflict escalates in Ukraine, then I'm afraid that Serbia cannot play the game of being between Russia and the West. It has to make a choice. And whatever step and direction it takes, it will have consequences for good and for bad. When it comes to the social stability, which is reflected so much in Kosovo, it is not accepting the European order by Serbia. And this is not an accident, and this is very well elaborated in the paper. I'm not going to the further details. And why convergence is important? Because I'm gonna try to simplify it. The convergence, the strategy of convergence, which is proposed in this paper, is more or less to follow next steps of Greece and the position of Greece by non-recognizers towards Kosovo. So this is in the nutshell our proposal about convergence. But I must admit that we shall discuss here and a bit further the timing of implementation of this strategy. We are all aware that the term of this administration of President Biden will be effectively finished in January 2000, in the beginning of 2025. More or less at that time, also the current mandate of the European Commission will expire, and I think that this is a golden momentum to achieve a final solution or a final agreement between Kosovo and Serbia by implementing this strategy. Nevertheless, if you look at this timeline, I think that if this strategy can be effective only if it is implemented in the next 2 years. So timing is crucial here. And that's why I think that there is a need for a strong and bold steps coming from US administration in order to put in place this strategy and to enable achievement of a dignified agreement between Kosovo and Serbia, which is currently disabled due to the leverage that Belgrade has on European Union and NATO, as Edward has explained earlier. And this leverage, ironically, has been given to Serbia voluntarily by 5 non-recognizers and 4 NATO recognizers. So these are my initial comments, and thank you very much indeed, Ed.
Thank you very much for that, Luli. And you really helped us as an expert there about NATO and the pathway and the crucial importance that NATO has for Kosovo and, of course, then for the region. You mentioned Greece. Let me just quickly say again that the approach Greece is what's important there is that it has its own, distinct from Cyprus and the other non-recognizers, its own affirmative strategic interest to recognize Kosovo. And what's further, Greece is on record. This is cited in the paper, the Foreign Minister Dendias, on record, and it's in writing, that how Greece has embraced the 2010 International Court of Justice ruling, the advisory opinion that it gave in 2010 at Serbia's request made through the UN General Assembly about Kosovo's independence. And further, it used that ruling to distinguish the Cyprus case. And that's very significant, not just for Athens, but for all the non-recognizers, because it shakes the foundation, this so-called fear of a legal precedent and international law. And Athens has, by embracing the ICJ decision and distinguishing the Northern Cyprus case, Athens has shaken that foundation. Now, ordinarily, Luli, we would go to Branislav Radeljic of Serbia, who, as I mentioned, our other co-author, but he cannot be with us today. So we are going to now turn to our discussants. And first among them will be Igor. So Igor Bonovic, please welcome. Igor, I presume you're in Belgrade, and we welcome you, Dobrodošli. Okay.
Thank you, Ed. And I want to thank really organizers for organizing this event, which comes in maybe not perfect timing due to the fact that we have ongoing crisis in Ukraine, but still with such a, I think, excellent report, it's always a good time to discuss the Balkans, because I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from here. Also, I want to congratulate you on the report. I think it's a very good analysis, and rarely we see such in-depth reports and really thinking outside of the box, which is very much needed, especially in the times when we are seeing that current strategy doesn't work. Furthermore, I think that the report really lay out concrete plan and steps how it can be achieved. We also see that rarely among especially think tankers and people who are experts in the Balkans when it comes to that. I think one thing is very significant about the report, which I really share, is that apart from country-specific problems in the Balkans, there is one underlying problem, which I think this report really highlights and really trying to address. My belief is that there is an underlying problem in the Balkans, and only by really addressing it, we can really make Balkans move forward. Before I go to the really concrete analysis of the report, I will try to think about what kind of crisis we do have in the Balkans, and what is the really origin of the crisis and what type of crisis we have. Because I think that in the Balkans, we don't have security crisis. We don't have potential of our conflict, at least for now. What we have is, first of all, the problem of the legacy of the wars and a shaken post-Yugoslav order, if you want. We have problem with democratic governance, and we have problem which is, I think, probably crucial, is that West, that is to say US and EU, for a long time didn't have any ambitions in the Balkans. When it comes to the first thing, the legacy of the wars and the symbolism of the borders and statehood issues that we have, this report clearly identifies that after these problems potentially be solved, there will be much more room for Balkans to progress, to become all the countries to become members of the EU and other things. But I'm afraid that something which really worries me is that currently the relationship between the countries in the Balkans are such, and I think EU was much working on that during the course of this decade, to strengthen them in order to prevent any kind of armed conflict. But in-house or in-country violence and really violent things can happen. And I think this is due to the fact that we have problems of democratic governance in almost all of the countries in the Balkans. And that makes the whole situation more complex. When it comes to the EU and US ambitions, if you recall, there was a big promise given to the Balkan states back in 2003 when it was promised that the Balkans will become part of the EU. Unfortunately, that promise didn't come true, and we are still, in that sense, muddling through and trying to find a way in the EU. In the meantime, what strategically, and I think that's very important aspect of this report because it thinks about strategic orientation of the countries of the region. Strategically, what happened is, and this I will differ my opinion from Mr. Petsy, is that actually EU somehow, when it's lost ambition, they let really China primarily, but also Russia to fill the void maybe around 2014 and 2015. And this is now the situation that we have. This situation requires us to think not only whether we can really go back to factory settings, let's say 2001, but how to deal with those powers and what to do with them, because they are here and China is probably here to stay. And this, I think, provides more complex issue. The third thing is that although a number of countries have been very ambitious in the Balkans in joining the EU and really trying to survive and trying to fight all the obstacles on their way to the EU, they failed. And they failed because in the EU, there is not much ambition of seeing these countries joining the EU. And here I refer to case of North Macedonia. And there is another layer of what we are feeling in the region, and this is a crisis of trust. And this crisis of trust is crisis of trust in EU. Thirdly, I think that the problem of really unresolving statehood issues is such that no one is really paying attention to the dialogue that we currently have, at least formally, between Kosovo and Serbia. And that dialogue is pretty much stuck for at least 6 months. And although I think EU created this channel, which at the beginning maybe managed to have some successes, somehow everyone is now shying away from it. When it comes to non-recognizers, I think the problem is that it's not only that non-recognizing states are really keeping the status quo. The problem is that they are not engaging, I think, sufficiently in solving, in trying to at least solve this problem. When it comes to the really, and this is my perspective more from the perspective of Serbia and what's happening from inside of the region, than really looking at, as the report is doing, more on the level of international relations and how each country can do and what can they do. But still, I think that, for example, and many speakers already mentioned that there is some kind of I think potential for the NATO membership of Kosovo, while having confidence and trust of the minority community in Kosovo to build on that and to do something with that. On the other hand, really recognizing Kosovo from the perspective of non-recognizers is something probably which current, and this is my current feeling and really thinking about it, the current EU in its shape and form cannot really do. A bigger problem is that this strategic orientation, especially of Serbia, is not that Serbia had its strategic orientation set in stone towards Russia and China. This is not the case, and this is not the case even in the strategic documents of Serbia. For example, national security doctrine of Serbia says that the final goal of Serbia is joining the EU. But the problem is that the current situation in Serbia is such that the leaders of Serbia are looking at Russia and China more as a model of how you run the country than really trying to be oriented towards, in this case, Russia and China. These are some kind of a contextual framework where I see and what are the current problems. I think that the job in the Balkans is almost done, and I think what we are having as a result of not finalizing it is this situation where inherited problems plus number of problems which are existing nowadays in Europe are really complicating this situation. I think it would require at least 2 democratic leaders in 2 countries, and I think the whole tide of democratic processes and more brighter future would probably happen. For now, this is it. If there is a question, so I will be happy to answer.
Igor, thank you so much for that. That was great. A very sober and analytical framework for the crisis that the region is in, that we face, but in a very nuanced way. And let me say, Igor, that your acknowledgement of the value of the report and the effort that we put into it means a lot, and of course its validity. Let me quickly say here before turning the floor to Angeluce, just quickly responding to some of your points and in agreement with them. You pointed out the overarching problem of democratic governance, and anyone in Serbia, obviously the BCSP is at the forefront, but anyone in Serbia concerned about democratic governance has to be concerned about this exploitation of leverage by Kosovo, because EU and US officials are not only, it would be bad enough if they were turning a blind eye to the state of democracy in Serbia, but they're not only turning a blind eye, they're affirmatively praising the Vučić regime, as we call it in the paper. So that's so anyone concerned about the state of democracy in Serbia has to be concerned about why that is. And again, it comes back to this leverage with Kosovo. You're right about the dialogue being stuck. Why is it stuck? Because of this leverage imbalance, and it's the specific issue now that the Vučić government has that's tailor-made for it to keep it, which is this association community of Serb majority municipalities. So it's ideally set up there that this status quo, which is all that the Vučić regime wants, it says, oh, well, look, we're so cooperative, but they need to do this. But of course, the context for achieving and having an effective association, one that's consistent with Kosovo's functionality, that requires more balance in the dialogue, and we don't have that. And then you mentioned about the non-recognizers not being engaged, and that's a very good point. And I thought Jan's point here was a great one about the fact that the current standing of the non-recognizers, by having this standing, other than Greece, which is also quite significant, the way that Greece has moved off, and Belgrade has seen this, Jan used this very good phrase, carte blanche. So of the other three, the signal is to Belgrade, well, you have carte blanche, and that's what Convergence is about, changing that immediately. And as Jan says, taking away that carte blanche by steps, just sending Slovak or Spanish troops back. Finally, let me quickly say, Igor, you were right, talking about the state of minorities, Serb minorities, and Kosovo's advances toward NATO. What does NATO mean? What does NATO membership mean for the state of minorities? It means responsibility for them, responsibility to them. And we see this in Ukraine, where Russia cannot really make a case anywhere about the state of the Russian minority in any of those Baltic states or Poland, or anywhere, but principally the Baltic states, there where you have significant Russian minorities. All NATO members, all democratic, and they respect the rights there. And the same is in Kosovo, and NATO membership is a progress towards that. Again, Igor, thank you so much. With that, Angeluce, please, in Berlin, quite the focus these days. Please take the.
Thank you so much, Ed. I want to start by saying that I would like to actually congratulate you and the co-authors on this very comprehensive report strategy, very much needed, because there has been a lot of talk recently of the deteriorating situation. So I think this also comes very timely as well. To try and answer the overarching questions that you posed at the beginning, whether the situation how bad it is, and whether it can get worse, and whether there will be a breakthrough. I think it depends really from which angle one looks at it, and it also depends what the next few years will reveal in terms of the current situation, the current ongoing situation related to the redrawing of European security architecture. So depending on which way that goes, then this could pose very many problems for the region or not. So I think it's kind of an open question, how worse can it get? But so I don't want to take too much of the time, because we're already close to the last 40 minutes. And very many important points have been made by the co-authors and by Igor. So what I want to focus on is just 3 brief points. So I want to say that focusing on the non-recognizers has been something that I enjoyed in this report, because they have proven to be a bit of an obstacle, especially for Kosovo. I also want to say a couple of words about the bilateral issues. And in the end, I just want to say that maybe sometimes Serbia is given too much of a credit in being treated as a stability actor and factor in the region, and also as an instability actor and factor, as is the case in your report. So maybe, you know, without treating it as an instability or stability factor, some things could still move along. So anyhow, on the non-recognizers, I think in the case of Kosovo especially, the non-recognizers have posed, in fact imposed a logic of status neutral on the whole of the EU, which then created a lot of obstacles for the development and the strengthening of Kosovo. You know, EU as such is not really status neutral. It shouldn't be, and it cannot. It could have kind of avoided the logic, imposing the logic of status neutrality towards Kosovo. And this, of course, as we know, has basically blocked Kosovo's path to the EU, although quite a lot of progress, it has to be said, has been made. So the non-recognizers should have been treated as a kind of a separate kettle of fish, and not be brought into this imposing the whole logic of status neutrality. In a way, status neutrality doesn't actually make sense, because a country is either independent or it's not. So you either recognize a country or you're not. There's nothing in between. So this is the first point that I wanted to make, that it has been a real obstacle, not only that there are 5 non-recognizers, but also the logic that they have imposed on the whole of the EU. On the bilateral issues, I also think that this has been very problematic. The fact that the bilateral issues, or the fact that the EU has not been able to decouple bilateral issues, the problematic bilateral issues, from the accession process. And we have seen this has created many problems in EU and in accession countries especially. So there was a case of Croatia and Slovenia that went on for a long time. There was a case of Greece and North Macedonia. And then there is the case of Bulgaria and North Macedonia, which is, I think we all agree here, and you mentioned it rightly so, that it's really problematic, and it's also setting a precedent. And there could be Greece-Albania on the maritime issues, and there's also a possibility, high possibility, that the bilateral issues not being decoupled from the accession process could pose some serious problems for Serbia, Kosovo. And in your report, you rightly point out that it's already causing problems for Kosovo. The third point that I wanted to make is the fact that sometimes Serbia is given maybe too much of a credit as a factor of stability in the region and as a factor of instability in this case. So I think Kosovo could still continue strengthening its status without it being linked to Serbia all the time. The main fault, I would say, was back in 2010. So I just want to try and maybe deconstruct a little bit that Serbia could have been kept away from the issues of Kosovo statehood. But in 2010, following the ICG opinion on Kosovo, the EU actually worked on a UN resolution to continue discussing, or to continue opening up a dialogue, or taking over a dialogue as a regional actor between Kosovo and Serbia, despite the fact that ICJ opinion has clearly spelled it out that Kosovo's independence has not violated international rules and regulations. So this made Serbia a determining factor for the further strengthening of Kosovo statehood, and basically made Serbia an actor, in fact, an important actor in how Kosovo were to organize itself in the integration and treatment of its Serbian minority. So I think instead of choosing this path, European Union, with support of US, could have helped Kosovo, focused on helping Kosovo and supporting Kosovo, opening up a dialogue with the Serbian community in Kosovo, and trying to find a way, together with the Serbian community, trying to find a way on how to best integrate them. Instead, we have Serbia being made a factor of stability, instability, whichever way we want to look at it, who will, in one way or another, decide what the future of the Serbian community will look in Kosovo. Today, in Kosovo, if one travels and tries to have different meetings with different actors, one would be told by the Serbian list or Srpska lista that the only authority that they look up to is actually the authority in Belgrade. And they say this publicly. So this has been, in a way, the role of Serbia in how the Kosovo government, Kosovo society will treat its Serbian minority, will integrate its Serbian minority, has been made a factor in this, which I think it's something that you also point out very clearly in your report, that it's proven to be the leverage that it's given. It's proven to be quite detrimental to further development. I think maybe I will stop here because, yeah, I'm sure that there will be lots of questions and lots of other important points have been made already. But I wanted to add these three points as a contribution to the debate. But I'm here and happy to answer further. Thank you very much again, Ed.
That's great, Angelucci, and thank you for your contribution in those 3 points. And you mentioned Srpska lista. Let me just flag for people so that we all remember that that is an innovation, a very dark innovation, if you ask me, from the Vučić government. And it wasn't always like that. It was quite different. There was pluralism among the Kosovo Serb community, a very vibrant pluralism with a range of political offerings for the Kosovo Serb voters to choose from. And of course, that's all gone by the wayside since soon not long after the Vučić government took power in 2012. And I will tell you, I was the deputy head of the OSCE mission then, and we negotiated the agreement with Belgrade and with Pristina to allow Kosovo Serbs to vote under OSCE assistance and auspices. And I certainly hope that that will be possible again to do using that same successful format. Now, we go from Angelucci in Berlin, we go to Srećko Latal in Sarajevo. And Srećko, you probably are the best one here to address the question of how bad can it get? And we hope that it will not be so bad there, what you'll tell us. And we, of course, look forward to your remarks on the wider context of how, if our approach could work to get us out of this constant crisis management mode that we're in. So Srećko, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ed. I'll try to be as brief and to the point because much was already said, and I would like to leave as much time for possible questions and answers afterwards. So, you know, how bad is it, and how can we fix it? As you probably most of you, if not all of you, know and see, Bosnia and Herzegovina has been in the spotlight again in recent weeks and months. Bosnia and Herzegovina seems to be the place of the most acute crisis in the Balkans at the moment. It has been, Bosnia has been in the middle of the steep decline for the past decade, but the crisis escalated rapidly and very seriously since last summer. One could also argue that the problems became quite serious already after the last general elections in 2018, because since then the political system has effectively collapsed in the country. One of the two entities in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Federation of BNH, did not get its new government. I mean, there was not even a serious attempt for the formation of the new government after 2018 elections. And that entity was run ever since by the government in technical mandate, run by a prime minister who is currently undergoing trial for corruption. In the meantime, we have also seen a new separatist agenda emerging from Bosnian Serb leader Milorad Dodik, which gained speed after last summer, after former High Representative Valentin Inzko imposed a law against the denial of genocide, which resulted with all parties from Republika Srpska withdrawing from state institutions. So state institutions since last summer have been completely blocked. As of recently, Republika Srpska parties have returned to the state institutions, acting upon the direct request from Serbian President Vučić. But it's clear that this return is not really something serious. It's actually a mockery of democracy, because these parties have pledged that they will be working and operating in state institutions only on issues of their interest. So what we have on the ground is that they are walking out and walking in from and to the sessions of the parliament, participating only in those parts of the session that are of interest to them. Unfortunately, the situation can get even worse, or will be getting even worse. One of the major issues that has been going on for a while is a blockade of the electoral reform. As most of you know, Bosnia and Herzegovina has been ordered by the European Court for Human Rights already some 15, 16 years ago to change its constitution, which was perceived by European Court for Human Rights already in several cases to be discriminating against different ethnic groups and and citizens in different parts of the country. Since April last year, European Union, in cooperation with the US administration, has launched another effort aimed at negotiating a solution for electoral reform. The last one has fallen apart without the last round of negotiations has fallen apart without result a few weeks ago in Bosnian coastal town of Neum. And since then, we have seen Milorad Dodik, upon Milorad Dodik's initiative, Republika Srpska National Assembly adopting several new laws that are deemed to be violating Dayton Peace Accord, Bosnia and Herzegovina Constitution, and different laws. We are expecting a session of the Croat National Council, which is essentially an NGO fig leaf for the Bosnian Croat ruling party, HDZ, which has already announced on several occasions that if there is no agreement on electoral reform reached by the end of last year, beginning of this year, that Bosnian Croats will boycott and or block the upcoming elections, general elections that are due to take place in October this year. Milorad Dodik has already pledged that in that case he would make sure that Republika Srpska joins in with the effort of HDZ. So Bosnia and Herzegovina is now facing the situation where it is possible that the upcoming elections will be blocked. In the meantime, we are expecting new radical and separatist initiatives from Milorad Dodik and Republika Srpska. And all this essentially shows that the Dayton Peace Accord is in tatters. The Washington Agreement, which is agreement that preceded the Dayton Agreement and established alliance between Bosniaks and Bosnian Croats, has collapsed as well. And that today, just like back in early 90s, all ethnic leaders in Bosnia and Herzegovina are essentially pursuing their nationalist agendas that are pushing the country towards deepening crisis and potentially new violence. Bosniaks are trying to use their largest numbers to dominate state institutions. Bosnian Croats are once again focusing on reestablishing their wartime third entity, Herceg Bosna, while Milorad Dodik is very openly and very publicly pursuing his separatist agenda, threatening with the possible secession of Republika Srpska and potential merger with Serbia. Now, how serious this really is remains to be seen. The good thing is that nothing is set in stone. What we are seeing is renewed efforts from the US administration. And these efforts have apparently managed to slow down some of the initiatives that Milorad Dodik has launched and is the next ones that he's still preparing. But unfortunately, I would say that if the electoral cycle is broken, if the country, if the elections do not take place, if they're blocked or boycotted, this will push the country already by the end of this year or the beginning of next year into even deeper phase of its crisis, where it is unfortunately not impossible that we see new violence. So again, I would like to stress that violence is not imminent, and I'm deliberately using the word violence because no one can say for sure what kind of shape and form that violence would take and how widespread it would be, and or how fast and good would be EUFOR and NATO in arresting this serious destabilization. But suffice to say that unfortunately, because of the situation in Bosnia, we are already facing, maybe even by the beginning of next year, potential serious destabilization. In that case, whether this destabilization includes violence or not, because of the strategic interest and political claims that Serbia and Croatia still have on parts of Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is likely that this destabilization will further draw Serbia and Croatia into this mess. Unfortunately, I have to say that I'm seeing similar, maybe not so radical, but similar developments in the rest of the region. So my point here is that this crisis is not only crisis of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Maybe I would call it crisis of unfinished businesses from the breakup of former Yugoslavia, because we see a gradual destabilization of all, let's say, multi-ethnic countries in the region, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. And all of them are in different kind of problem, and unless these problems are addressed in the immediate future, then we can expect that this crisis or the series of crises will continue worsening in the coming weeks, months. All this is further complicated by divergence on the global level, as some of the panelists have already said, because of the failure of the European Union to establish its firm political and economic presence in the region, because of what now clearly seems to be the collapse of EU enlargement process and perspective for the Balkans. All Balkan countries have turned towards alternatives, towards China, towards Russia, towards Turkey, towards Gulf countries. Unfortunately, these foreign influences are now becoming even more influential than the influence of the European Union, as one of the panelists said, not because China, Russia, Turkey are investing more than the EU. It's actually quite the opposite. But it is because Balkan leaders want to have these foreign influences as more influential than the EU. This kind of brings me to the second question, which in a way I think that I have already answered. How to fix this problem or these problems? I'm afraid that that the European Union and the US have allowed these problems in the Balkans to degenerate to the point where we do not have either easy or simple solutions anymore. We are all now, be it as officials or experts, we are forced to try to assess which option and which alternative is lesser evil compared to some other alternative. But I would say that in my view, the solution lies once again with serious revival or reestablishment of the strong and relevant and concrete carrot and stick approach, and by convergence of European Union and US efforts in the Balkans. And again, maybe the main question is that many people are asking themselves or asking me and other Balkan experts, why should US and EU do that? I think that the reason why the US and EU should do that is because of their own interest, because of their own stability. And I'm not even considering moral or ethical reasons anymore, because we all see that we live in the world where we don't know whether next morning we will wake up in the middle of the World War III in case of violence emerging between Ukraine and Russia. But speaking about Ukraine and Russia, unfortunately, this too is becoming increasingly linked with the Balkans, because according to different officials and experts, in case of further escalation of crisis between Ukraine and Russia, Balkan, or more specifically Bosnia and Herzegovina, may be one of the areas where we may see increased tensions or even deliberate violence in a way to as an excuse to draw away the public attention from the Western community to what is happening between Ukraine and Russia. So I'll stop here and leave space for questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sechko. And I want to underscore the phrase. I thought it was very interesting that you gave us a very carefully calibrated, is the word I would use, very carefully calibrated assessment of the potential, and you did. You answered that question of how bad it could get in a very carefully calibrated way. And I want to just re-quote your phrase, potential serious destabilization. And so you make it clear you're not being, frantic about it and saying it has to be this way, but you're noting that yes, there is a a potential there. And in your perspective, it's not even just confined to Bosnia Herzegovina, of course. You use the word fighting, and I'd say as someone who's there throughout the wars, any fighting whatsoever, people don't understand. It's not about the number of casualties. It immediately changes the dynamics, and it's extremely serious. So I thank you for that, Srećko. We have some time here, and I have a question I want to come back to Igor with in a second, Igor, and I'll alert you. But stay, Srećko, stay with us. Igor, to let you tip you off, I want to ask you about the impact, your view of Serbian elections, and if we can envision something pre and post Serbian elections. So, Igor, but before I come to you on that, and obviously anyone else who wants to jump in, let me just quickly say something, Srećko, about our report and this relationship. And you alluded to both Serbia and Croatia. And that, just to say that this situation of crisis in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Srećko, I see that it suits Vučić very well because he's, quote, needed on this. And he can play this role, again, of restraining Milorad Dodik and making himself needed here in this situation. And again, weakening the West when we need to be pressing Serbia on, among other things, corruption and state of democracy. So that's, I think, is a real problem. And again, so this is the Kosovo connection here. And let's, I would say, ask you this, Srećko, as well. That, my perspective is that basically, whatever differences there are between Dodik and Vučić in terms of tactics, timing, and egos, and their standing, whatever difference there is, the strategy is the same, and the approach, the fundamental perspective is the same. And we would not have Serb world discussed in Belgrade and constantly there by Alexander Vulin there if it weren't the case, and if there were some genuine interest in making Bosnia a functional state in Belgrade, and there isn't. And so there's a real, let's use the word convergence there between Belgrade and Banja Luka, whatever differences there are, again, on the tactics or timing. And again, I see this is suitable to Vučić. And just quickly on the Croats, to say, you said the Washington Agreement falling apart. I just want to say the perspective there in the report that you'll see there, there's section 10 there about which looks at Bosnia and Herzegovina, that we have to remember the Washington Agreement, that concept there of ending that Croat-Bosniak dispute, it's predicated on one thing, and that's that Bosnia and Herzegovina is a functional state. So if there's no possibility, if Republika Srpska and posture from Belgrade and Banja Luka prevents there from being a functional state, then don't expect a lot of progress in Croat-Bosniak relations, and expect opportunism there also, not just the demographic kind in Sarajevo that you mentioned, but also expect that as we saw during the war. So it's a function ultimately of the Serb perspective on Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's ultimately the question of whether that country can survive, and how that's our perspective. So Srećko, if you, I don't know if you want to comment on that. Otherwise, I'm going to go to Igor about elections in Serbia. But please, before I do, go ahead, Srećko, please.
Well, I do agree with both what you say and the points that were outlined in your quite interesting paper. First, regarding Vučić, absolutely. I mean, Vučić has been, for the past decade, has been the key for stabilization and destabilization of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo and Montenegro. And yes, I think that this approach where Americans and many European countries, mainly Germany, were appeasing Vučić in order to buy him over so that he could keep Dodik and other radicals in control. I think that the time for this approach has passed. And I think that this approach, while maybe it was keeping Bosnia and the rest of the region relatively stable, but it has, even if that would be true, it has inflicted immense damage to the region, because throughout this period, Vucic, as well as all other ethnic leaders across the region, have been playing on the nationalist agenda. As a result, I would say that all of the region is in a way back in a very similar atmosphere, in a very similar situation as it was in 90s. One thing that I would like to stress, that this divergence, this polarization that we are seeing among politicians has been, I mean, the ordinary people have been spared from it, or to put it the other way around, ordinary people, at least in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I also know in the rest of the region, many ordinary people, many ordinary citizens have been ignoring this radicalization of the situation. And in a way, although unfortunately the international community, or to be more specific, US and EU, did not invest enough in reconciliation in the region, we did have some kind of reconciliation by itself, internal reconciliation in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in the rest of the region. And I still believe that ordinary people from different walks of life, from different ethnic or religious groups, are still living, most of them, in peace with each other, still relying on the old traditions of good neighbors. But the problem is that the escalation of political and ethnic tensions, which have been pushed through by all politicians, especially people like Vucic and Dodik, over the last year or so, are becoming are now influencing ordinary people more and more. So, as you have probably heard, people in Bosnia and Herzegovina today, their main topic is whether there will be war or not, and people are becoming seriously afraid. And to very quickly address your second question about Croatia, Croatia has been, in a way, Vucic was kind of occasionally keeping Dodik under his thumb and kind of, preventing him to go even more radical. I would say that Zagreb, for much of the last several years, have been acting even in a worse way, and has been actively supporting very radical ways and ideas that have been promoted by the Bosnian Croat nationalist leadership in Bosnia and Herzegovina, most specifically by Dragan Čović. But unfortunately, neither US and especially not the EU seem to be willing or ready to work their way through Zagreb to explain to Zagreb that they actually have it wrong, and that they really need to seriously change their attitude towards Bosnian Croats and towards Bosnia and Herzegovina, unless they want to be drawn into another serious destabilization.
Thank you, Srečko, and that was great. And you're right to point that out. And we noted in the report the very negative the statements by President Milanovic, and the posture, the receiving of Dodik, and the meetings there in Croatia. Again, I'd say strategically, it's different with Croatia because as a NATO member and as an EU member, and ultimately Bosnia-Herzegovina is a question there of its destiny will rest on whether Serbs in whole accept the country that it will exist. And Croatia, as we know, cannot promote separation without the Serbs. So that's, in my view, there in their report, there's a finite constraint on there. And so let me quickly here, I want to turn to, oh, sorry, Sergio, on reconciliation, just one thing to say, because it's so important. Many people think, oh my gosh, there was so much killing in Bosnia, and these ancient tribal hatreds and so forth. And just to point out, as we noted in the report, that there was really the speech by Dodik's predecessor, Dragan Čović, that's Čović, not Čović, there, as President of Republika Srpska, who gave that emotional speech of acknowledgement and even really contrition about Srebrenica. And the important point is it was accepted by Bosniaks, even by victims and families of victims of Srebrenica. So the notion that people are just living in this and that they cannot emerge from this is not true. It's a function, as we say, strategic orientation and the national power, and that's where Kosovo comes in. Igor, I'd like to turn to Igor and ask you about the perspective on Serbian elections, and can we expect some change coming out of that in the aftermath? And then finally, I will go to Luli there in Pristina, and if anyone else has a burning thing to send me a comment on chat, and I will acknowledge you. But Igor and then Luli, please.
Thank you, Ed, for that question. When it comes to the elections in Serbia, it is a matter of whether really we have fair and free elections, and unfortunately we don't have. This will be rather a battle between David and Goliath, as Serbian opposition from wherever political spectrum it comes is mostly defamated in most of the media, and most of the media are controlled by Vučić. So they accepted to go into the elections where actually you have really, really unequal game. And this is, well, itself problematic. Although EU Parliament wanted to interfere, and they did something, but that's very limited. The whole control of the whole election process is in hands of President Vučić. What we can expect, probably because Vučić apparently, according to some independent polls, lost the popularity it had. What we can expect is possible, and I'm here cautious, optimistic, win of the opposition in Belgrade. And then if that happens, it may result in probably, well, spread of more opposition votes if we come to the second round of presidential elections, because on 3rd of April we will have elections for the president, for parliamentarian elections, and elections from the city of Belgrade. Whether there is going to be a change, I don't know. What I probably can guess is that after the election, if the President Vučić remains in the power for the second mandate, what we probably can expect that is going to be even less democratic as it is now. Probably there will be a strong international pressure on him when it comes to Kosovo and whole other things. Recently, US administration put some close allies from Kosovo on the sanction list. It is what we hear and what are the rumors that there's going to be a new names added to that list. So this will increase pressure on him, and probably this will, in a way, push him in, again, arms of either Russia and China. If the opposition wins, and they are really marginalized, to say the least, this can be a new breed into democracy in Serbia, and then that can lead to a whole other picture and whole other scenarios in this country.
Igor, great. Thank you for that. I thought it was striking that you said about the potential for more pressure, including on Kosovo, could push him in the arms of Russia. And I just point out that's why convergence is so important, because that addresses that issue. It removes the leverage there, and it makes Russia and China of negligible value to Belgrade. But as long as that leverage remains, then Igor, your points are well taken, very well taken, and thank you for that assessment, and also about the nature of the fundamentally undemocratic nature of the elections that are going to come there. Luli, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ed. Now I would like to discuss the issue that perhaps I didn't. It was a choice of countries of the region on the door to Russia and China.
Luli, I have to tell you, you're coming in broken. You're coming in very broken. Your bandwidth is low.
My voice, is it okay?
Now it is. Just know that we have a signal. Your bandwidth of your internet signal is low, so it's a bit broken. Try now.
Is it okay right now?
Right now it is. Please.
Okay, very good. So perhaps I didn't explain, I didn't illustrate in detail what I was saying about that countries of the region, certain countries of the region have decided without any pressure actually to join, to open the door to Russian and Chinese influence in the region. And this is not dependent from the willingness of the EU to to accelerate the process of accession of these countries. I'm going to illustrate with the case of Serbia. So Serbia got a decision from European Council, European Commission endorsing decision for opening of the accession talks on 28th of June 2013, right after the first agreement on normalization of relations with Kosovo. So it was the strongest support that Serbia got then. And what it did a month after, it signed a document on strategic partnership with Russia. And this has been done by the then President Nikolic and President Putin. So it was a deliberate choice, not because of lack of the EU support. The highest EU support for Serbia actually came then, when it opened the door to Serbia's EU membership. And then when they got this, Belgrade moved to Russia. I don't think that this argument fits very well. Actually, that because of EU, how to say, lack of perspective for EU enlargement is affecting the countries of the region to move towards Russia and China. I don't think that this is an argument. I think that the argument might be on the other side, that this has been done by their autocratic leaderships who does not see EU liberal democracy as a model of governance, but they do like much more Putinism or other autocratic models of governance. And by doing this, they are giving a clear political statement, which is not public. We don't want to join EU. That's it.
Luli, thank you for that. And mindful of the time, I'm going to quickly go, without making any comment there, but quickly go to Srećko back in Sarajevo, who will close us out here. I'll say a final word of goodbye. But Srećko, please, I know you spoke a lot about Serb perspectives and Croat perspectives there. And what about the questions of the civic option for Bosnia and Herzegovina and the perspective in Sarajevo? Please, Srećko.
Thanks, Ed, for that question, because in fact that very issue has been drawing quite a lot of controversy in recent weeks and months. It is, as we can see, influencing even some Western countries, specifically Germany, and the Netherlands, since some of the German and Dutch officials and MPs have expressed their views that that US and EU should not be negotiating some quick fixes for the electoral reform, but that Bosnia should be getting more civic-oriented system and the government. And you know, although personally I'm all but in favor of this idea and would very much like to see my country being a more civic country today, but I have to say that for the time being, I don't see this as a feasible or realistic option for several reasons. I mean, on one hand, the fact is, and you know, there's no question about it, that that we have some politicians who do have a very clear and stick to very clear civic, very liberal criteria, and we have many citizens who also have interest in such country, in such future. Nevertheless, we see that tens of thousands of people are leaving for more civic states like Germany, looking for a job and better life there. But the problem is that at the moment, there is simply no political party in the country that I detect that has a clear pro-Bosnian, as they call it, program that, in my opinion, should be open to everyone, to Bosnian Croats, to Bosnian Serbs, to Bosniaks, to minorities, that should not be going towards either Bosniak or Croat or Serb nationalism, but would be pursuing economic platforms focusing on you know, fight against corruption and opening of new jobs, etc., etc. We don't have, or at least I don't see them, those parties. And secondly, it's quite clear that in the current parliament, there is simply no support for any such idea, because many Bosnian Croats and many Bosnian Serbs do see those initiatives as essentially a fig leaf for Bosniak nationalism. So I think that this question, which is very relevant for Bosnia and Herzegovina and also for all other Balkan countries, should be taken care of through a long-term engagement of US and EU officials in the region. But I really don't think that short-term fixes could or should be even tried to be imposed on the country, because it's quite likely that it would only kind of speed up the crisis that the country is already in.
Srečko, thank you very much. And again, I note your comments there at the outset about answering that first question very clearly about potential destabilization, serious destabilization, not guaranteed, but potential serious destabilization. And I note also your point that this is a crisis, an unending crisis, basically unfinished crisis of the dissolution of Yugoslavia. And the point of our report is to finally bring a curtain down on that 3-decade dissolution where it started, which is in Kosovo. And I believe the discussion today has been very informative, very enlightening, as one would expect with this level of expertise. And I would say just a takeaway for me is to hear the clarity that convergence, in fact, is possible. And we heard, for example, Julia describing, and Jan, that this is possible for evolution in the posture of these non-recognizing states. And we heard from our other distinguished guests here about the potential positive impact that it would have. So convergence clearly is possible. It's up to the US and to work with its allies in partners to achieve it. And again, to move us from a posture of weakness in the Balkans to one where efforts, for example, to build a regional common market, which are very effective, do not rely on strengthening the leverage that Belgrade already enjoys, but rather is part of a wider framework that brings the region, grows the economy in a context where there are shared democratic values. And convergence by these four non-recognizers within NATO can do that. So I want to thank everyone here. Above all, I want to thank SAIS Events for doing the fantastic job that they always do on these events. I want to thank all of our co-sponsors, in addition, of course, to our great leadership at SAIS Foreign Policy Institute, Wilson Center, ECFR, Transatlantic Leadership Network, and Balkan Insider, to thank all of you for your support on this, and to thank our wonderful guests, Yulia, Angeluche, Igor, Luli, and Jan and Srečko. Thank you all for watching today. Our best wishes to our colleagues, Branislav and Albert, where they are, and my best wishes to you all for the rest of the day. Thank you so much for watching.